My parents gave me to a foster family to travel the world, but over time they wanted to take me back, saying they love me. When I was 14, my world shattered in a way I never thought possible. My parents, who had always been a bit eccentric but loving, sat me down one evening after dinner. It was a cool spring night, and I remember the way the breeze drifted through the open windows. My dad kept fidgeting with his wedding ring, twisting it around his finger, while my mom stared at the table like it held some secret escape plan. "Lindsay," my mom began, her voice shaking just enough to make my stomach drop. "We've been talking about some financial things, and we've made a decision. A hard one. I didn't understand at first. They said words like debt, downsizing, and temporary, but the reality hit me like a slap. They were sending me to a foster home. My dad said, 'It's for the best. We just can't provide for you right now.'" My mom nodded along, tears streaming down her face. They promised it wasn't forever, that it was a sacrifice to help us all get through this rough patch. It felt like a nightmare, but I still clung to their reassurances. I packed a single suitcase with my favorite clothes, a photo of the three of us at Disneyland, and a stuffed bear my dad had won me at a fair. When they dropped me off at the Cooper house, I was too numb to cry. The Coopers were nice, a middle-aged couple, soft-spoken and warm. Susan Cooper hugged me the moment I stepped out of the car, her short blonde hair brushing my cheek. "Welcome, Lindsay. You're part of the family now," she said. Her husband, Greg, gave me a shy smile and helped carry my suitcase inside. Their home smelled like vanilla candles and fresh laundry, nothing like the worn-out, slightly musty smell of my own house. At first, I waited for my parents to visit or call. Days turned into weeks, and the silence stretched out like a vast, empty canyon. I finally worked up the courage to ask the Coopers if they'd heard from them. Susan hesitated, then admitted that they hadn't left any contact information. "I'm sure they'll reach out soon," she said, but her tone betrayed the doubt in her words. One night, while scrolling aimlessly on my phone, I stumbled across my parents' blog. It was like a punch to the gut. The screen lit up with pictures of them smiling in front of a sunset in Bali, sipping cocktails in the Maldives, and hiking through European villages. They weren't struggling or drowning in debt. They were traveling the world, living a dream life while I was stuck in foster care. I felt like a discarded toy, left behind because I no longer fit into their plans. Despite the betrayal, I tried to focus on my new life with the Coopers. Susan and Greg were kind and patient. They didn't have any kids of their own, so they threw themselves into making me feel welcome. Susan taught me how to bake cookies from scratch, while Greg would sit with me in the evenings, helping with homework and sharing stories about his time in the Navy. School was a mixed bag. I'd always been a decent student, but now I threw myself into my studies with an almost obsessive intensity. It was my way of coping. If I could excel in school, maybe I could prove to myself that I was worth something. I joined the debate team, volunteered at the library, and started learning guitar. Anything to keep my mind off the gaping hole where my parents' love used to be. But no amount of distraction could completely erase the sting of abandonment. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the day they left me at the Cooper house. I'd wonder what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough for them to stay. About a year after moving in with the Coopers, something happened that shook me to my core. Susan was cleaning out the garage one afternoon when she called me over. "Lindsay, honey, do you recognize this?" she asked, holding up a worn leather briefcase. It was my dad's. I'd recognize it anywhere. The scuffs on the corners, the faint smell of old cologne. "What's it doing here?" I asked, my heart pounding. Susan hesitated, her brow furrowing. "I don't know." It was tucked away in the corner, under some old boxes. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were papers, legal documents, receipts, and what looked like a handwritten letter. My eyes skimmed the pages, piecing together a story I couldn't believe. My parents hadn't sent me away because of financial problems. They'd signed over full guardianship to the Coopers without telling me. The letter was from my dad to Susan, thanking her for taking on this responsibility and promising to send money monthly for my care. There were no signs of struggle or hardship, just a cold, calculated decision to leave me behind. I felt the room spinning. Susan tried to comfort me, but her words barely registered. I locked myself in my room, rereading the documents over and over. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd erased me from their lives entirely. In the weeks that followed, I tried to confront Susan and Greg about what they knew. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded one evening, my voice shaking. "We thought it was best not to overwhelm you," Greg said, his face etched with regret. "We didn't know how to explain. It wasn't your decision to make." I snapped. I deserved to know the truth. Despite my anger, I couldn't bring myself to hate the Coopers. They had been more of a family to me in a year than my own parents ever were. Still, the betrayal cut deep, and I didn't know if I'd ever fully recover. I began to channel my emotions into writing. I started a journal, pouring out every hurt, every question, every ounce of confusion and anger. It became my therapy, a way to process everything I was going through. The discovery of my parents' social media was like ripping off a bandage that hadn't fully healed. I thought I had braced myself for the worst after finding out they had legally handed me over to the Coopers, but seeing them post pictures of their adventures, smiling on sandy beaches, dining in luxury restaurants, and hiking picturesque mountain trails, stung in a way I couldn't put into words. They were living a carefree, glamorous life while I was picking up the pieces of my shattered one. One night, as I scrolled through their updates, I noticed something odd. A boy was tagged in one of their photos, a boy with shaggy brown hair, awkwardly standing off to the side of a group picture taken in front of a grand old estate. His name was Ethan, and I recognized him immediately. My brother. The sight of him hit me like a wave, pulling me under. I hadn't thought about Ethan in years. He was 6 years older than me, and we hadn't been particularly close when we were younger. He had always been quiet and withdrawn, more interested in books and video games than playing outside with me. The caption under the photo mentioned something about Ethan's boarding school experience. Curious, I clicked on his profile. His posts were private, but his profile picture, a grainy shot of him standing alone, his expression distant, was enough to give me chills. The Ethan I remembered had a spark in his eyes, even when he was lost in thought. This Ethan looked haunted. I started piecing things together from my parents' posts. They'd sent him off to a strict boarding school years before they left me with the Coopers. The school's website painted a rosy picture, with smiling students and lush green campuses, but a quick internet search revealed a different story. There were dozens of articles and forum threads about the place. Allegations of abuse, rigid discipline, and emotionally scarring practices that left kids broken. My stomach churned as I read the accounts. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of my parents' selfishness pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't just me they had abandoned. Ethan had been suffering too, in a different but equally painful way. The realization fueled a mix of anger and determination. I didn't know how I could help Ethan yet, but I knew I had to keep moving forward for both of us. With the Coopers' encouragement, I threw myself into my schoolwork more than ever. It was my way of gaining control, of proving to myself that I could rise above what my parents had done. Susan and Greg were incredibly supportive, always cheering me on and giving me space to process my emotions. They encouraged me to apply for every scholarship and program I could find, and I did, spending hours crafting essays and preparing for interviews. One day, as I sat in the library surrounded by a mountain of applications, I met someone who would become a major part of my journey. Her name was Ellie, a fellow student with bright red hair and a laugh that could light up a room. She noticed the stack of papers on my desk and asked, "Are you building a fortress or trying to win every scholarship in the world?" I laughed despite myself. "A little of both," I admitted. "I need all the help I can get." Ellie pulled up a chair and introduced herself. She was smart, driven, and a little bit nosy, in the best way. She had this infectious energy that made it impossible not to like her. We became fast friends, and her encouragement helped me keep going when the stress of it all felt overwhelming. A few months later, I got the news that changed everything. I was sitting in the Coopers' living room, nervously refreshing my email, when the message finally came through. It was from one of the top universities in the country, offering me a full-ride scholarship worth over $90,000 a year. I screamed so loudly that Susan came running in, thinking I'd injured myself. "What is it?" she asked, breathless. "I got it," I shouted, waving my phone in the air. "I got the scholarship." She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you, Lindsay," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've worked so hard for this." Greg joined us a moment later, grinning from ear to ear when he heard the news. That night, they surprised me with a little celebration, just the three of us, a homemade cake, and a banner that said "Congratulations, Lindsay," in big, colorful letters. It was one of the happiest nights of my life. The scholarship wasn't just about the money. It was validation that all my hard work had paid off, that I was capable of achieving something big despite everything I'd been through. It was also a ticket to independence. For the first time, I could see a future where I wasn't defined by my parents' choices or the pain they had caused me. As I prepared to leave for college, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The Coopers had become my family in so many ways, and the thought of leaving them was bittersweet. "You're going to do amazing things," Susan told me as she helped me pack my things. "But don't forget, this is always your home." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I won't forget." Ellie and I ended up at the same university, which made the transition a little easier. She was my rock during those first few months, always there to cheer me on or drag me out for a coffee break when I was buried in assignments. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of this opportunity. I joined clubs, attended networking events, and started building a life that was entirely my own. But even as I thrived in my new environment, I couldn't shake the thought of Ethan. His face haunted me, a constant reminder of the brother I'd lost touch with. I tried reaching out to him through social media, but my messages went unanswered. It was like he had built a wall around himself, and I had no idea how to break through. One day, while scrolling through old photos on my phone, I came across a picture of us as kids. We were sitting on the swings in our backyard, grinning at the camera. I decided to try one more time. I wrote him a heartfelt message, telling him about my scholarship, my life with the Coopers, and how much I missed him. I didn't expect a response, but sending it felt like the right thing to do. To my surprise, he replied a week later. His message was short and guarded, but it was a start. He told me he was still at the boarding school, counting down the days until he could leave. He didn't say much else, but I could sense the pain beneath his words. I wrote back immediately, telling him that I was here for him, no matter what. Over time, our conversations grew longer and more open. He told me about the harsh rules at the school, the loneliness he felt, and the anger he carried toward our parents. I shared my own struggles and triumphs, and slowly, we began to rebuild our connection. Things had finally started to feel normal, or at least as normal as they could get for someone like me. I was thriving in college, thanks to my scholarship and the unwavering support of the Coopers and my friend Ellie. My relationship with Ethan was still fragile, but we were talking more regularly, rebuilding the bond that had been fractured by years of distance and neglect. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful, and that's when my parents reappeared. It started with an email from my mom. The subject line was, "Thinking of you," and the message itself was short and vague. "Hi, Lindsay. We've been following your progress and are so proud of you. Would love to catch up sometime. Let us know when you're free to talk." I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure how to feel. My initial reaction was anger. Where had this concern been when I needed them? But there was also a small, nagging part of me that wanted to believe they had changed, that maybe they finally regretted what they'd done. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I called Susan, who always knew how to help me sort through my emotions. "Do you think they're sincere?" I asked her, pacing my dorm room. Susan sighed. "I don't know, sweetheart. Only you can decide if you're ready to hear them out. But be careful. You've come so far, and I don't want them to hurt you again." A week later, I got another message, this time from my dad. It was longer and more detailed, talking about how proud they were of me for winning the scholarship and how they'd love to visit me on campus. There was something about the tone that felt off, too enthusiastic, too rehearsed. Still, I couldn't shake the curiosity. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them. They drove up to campus on a sunny Saturday afternoon. I waited for them outside the student center, my heart pounding as their car pulled into the parking lot. My mom was the first to step out, looking as polished and put together as ever. My dad followed, his grin so wide it seemed unnatural. They hugged me like we were some happy family reuniting after years apart. It felt wrong, like wearing someone else's clothes. We sat at a nearby cafe, and they asked all the right questions about my classes, my friends, and my future plans. On the surface, it seemed like they genuinely cared. But the longer the conversation went on, the more I noticed the cracks in their facade. They kept bringing up money, how expensive college must be, how hard it was to get by these days. My dad even joked about family discounts on some of the funds they'd sent for my care when I was living with the Coopers. It didn't take long for their true intentions to come out. My mom leaned in, her voice low and conspiratorial. "You know, Lindsay, we've been thinking about some investment opportunities. With your scholarship, you've got a little financial wiggle room, right? Maybe you could help us out, just a loan to get us back on our feet." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You abandoned me, and now you want my money?" They looked taken aback, but only for a moment. My dad quickly tried to smooth things over. "It's not like that, sweetheart. We just thought it could be a way to reconnect, to work together as a family." "A family?" I repeated, incredulous. "You have no idea what that word means." I left before they could say another word. My hands were trembling as I walked back to my dorm, and I could feel tears threatening to spill over. I called Ellie, who came over right away with a pint of ice cream and a bag of chips. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "They don't deserve a second of your time." But the encounter left me shaken. For years, I told myself I didn't need my parents, that I was better off without them. But their sudden reappearance dredged up old wounds I thought had healed. It made me question everything: my progress, my worth, my ability to trust. A few days later, Ethan called. His voice was tense, like he'd been holding something back. "They came to see me," he said. "Mom and Dad." My heart sank. "What did they want?" "The same thing they wanted from you, I'm guessing," he said bitterly. "Money. They know I've been saving up to move out when I graduate, and they're already trying to sink their claws into it." I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt to hear. "What did you tell them?" "I told them to go to hell," he said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "But they're not giving up. Mom keeps texting me, saying she just wants to make things right. It's exhausting." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. "Ethan, you don't owe them anything. They've only ever looked out for themselves. You have to do what's best for you." "I know," he said quietly, "but it's not that simple. They're still our parents." I couldn't argue with that, as much as I wanted to. Instead, I focused on being there for him, just like he'd been there for me when we reconnected. Over the next few weeks, we talked more than we ever had before, sharing memories, fears, and hopes for the future. Slowly but surely, we began to rebuild our relationship, piece by piece. One day, he called me out of the blue and said, "I'm coming to see you. I need to get away from them, and I need your help." When he arrived on campus, he looked like a shadow of the brother I remembered. He was thinner, his eyes dark with exhaustion, but there was also a determination in him that I hadn't seen before. We spent hours talking, and I could see the weight lifting off his shoulders as he opened up about everything he'd been through. Together, we came up with a plan to help him break free from our parents' influence. I introduced him to the Coopers, who welcomed him with open arms and offered their support. Susan, ever the nurturer, gave him advice on budgeting and setting boundaries, while Greg offered to help him find a part-time job to save up for his move. Ethan stayed with me for a few weeks, and during that time, we grew closer than ever. We talked about our childhood, our dreams, and our shared determination to build lives that our parents could no longer control. It wasn't easy, but we both knew it was worth it. When Ethan finally left to start his new life, I felt a mix of sadness and pride. He was taking the first steps toward independence, just like I had. And for the first time, I truly believed that we could both move forward, together, but free from the weight of our parents' selfishness. After Ethan left to start his new life, I found myself reflecting on everything we had been through: the betrayals, the struggles, and the small victories that had brought us to where we were. I realized that, for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But as much as I had achieved, I felt a pull to do more, to use my experiences to help others who had been in my shoes. That's how the idea for my financial literacy business started. It began as a simple blog where I shared tips and resources for foster kids and young adults trying to navigate life on their own. I wrote about everything from budgeting to building credit to finding affordable housing. The response was overwhelming. Emails and comments poured in from people all over the country, thanking me for breaking down complicated topics in a way that felt accessible and empowering. One of the first messages I received was from a girl named Maya, who was about to age out of the foster care system. She told me she'd been terrified of what came next, unsure how to handle rent, utilities, and all the other responsibilities that came with adulthood. But after reading my blog, she felt like she finally had a roadmap. Her gratitude brought me to tears and solidified my resolve to turn this passion into something bigger. With encouragement from the Coopers and Ellie, I started offering one-on-one coaching sessions for young adults in similar situations. Word spread quickly, and before I knew it, I was juggling dozens of clients while still managing my blog. It was exhilarating but exhausting, and I realized I needed to scale up if I wanted to reach more people. That's when I decided to turn my blog into a full-fledged business. The process was daunting. I spent countless nights researching, building a website, and learning the ins and outs of running a company. I also reached out to a few people I'd met in college, tech-savvy friends like Ryan, who helped me design an app, and Maria, a marketing whiz who taught me how to get my message out to a wider audience. Together, we launched the business under the name Next Step Financial. The app was a game changer. It offered step-by-step guides, budgeting tools, and even a chat feature where users could ask me questions directly. Within months, it was gaining traction, and I started receiving invitations to speak at events and conferences. Seeing the impact my work was having was incredibly fulfilling. By the end of the first year, Next Step Financial had earned over $300,000, and the app had thousands of users, many of whom had come from foster care backgrounds. But success came with its own set of challenges. As my business grew, so did the attention, and not all of it was positive. I started noticing strange comments on my blog and social media posts, accusing me of being a fraud or exploiting my past for profit. At first, I brushed them off as random trolls, but the attacks soon escalated. Articles started appearing online, claiming I was exaggerating my story for sympathy and financial gain. Some even included quotes from anonymous sources claiming to be former clients who felt betrayed by my advice. I had a sinking feeling about who might be behind it. My parents had been uncharacteristically quiet since our last confrontation, but I knew better than to believe they'd given up. They were opportunists, and my growing success was the perfect target for their manipulation. My suspicions were confirmed when I received a letter from their lawyer, accusing me of defamation. They claimed I had damaged their reputation by sharing false and malicious stories about my childhood. The letter demanded that I issue a public apology and pay them $50,000 in damages, or face a lawsuit. I was furious. The audacity of their demands was almost laughable, but the threat of legal action wasn't something I could ignore. I called Susan immediately, my hands shaking as I read her the letter. "They're trying to scare you," she said firmly. "Don't let them." Ethan was even more blunt when I told him. "They're parasites," he said. "They'll do whatever it takes to get what they want. You can't give them an inch." With their support, I reached out to a lawyer of my own, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Denise. She reviewed the letter and assured me that my parents didn't have a leg to stand on. "Everything you've shared about your experiences is protected under free speech," she said. "They're bluffing." Even so, the situation weighed on me. I hated the idea of being dragged into a public fight, especially when I was trying to focus on helping others. But Denise convinced me to take a proactive approach. Together, we drafted a public statement addressing the accusations and reaffirming my commitment to transparency and integrity. I also reached out to a few of my clients who had shared their success stories with me, asking if they'd be willing to speak out in my defense. Their testimonials were heartfelt and powerful, and they reminded me why I had started this journey in the first place. The backlash didn't stop entirely, but the support I received far outweighed the negativity. Messages poured in from people who had been inspired by my story, thanking me for standing my ground. One of the most touching notes came from a young man named Derek, who had been homeless after aging out of foster care. He told me that my app had helped him save enough money to get his first apartment and that he was now working toward his dream of becoming a chef. Stories like his gave me the strength to keep going, even when the road felt impossibly hard. My parents didn't stop their attempts to discredit me. They gave interviews to anyone who would listen, painting themselves as victims of my vendetta. At one point, they even showed up at one of my speaking events, causing a scene and demanding to be heard. Security escorted them out, but the incident left me shaken. Ethan was my rock through it all. He called me almost every day, reminding me that I wasn't alone. "They're trying to tear you down because they see how far you've come," he said. "But you're stronger than they'll ever be." He was right. I had built something meaningful, something that was changing lives. I wasn't about to let their bitterness take that away from me. Over time, their efforts to sabotage me started to lose steam. The more they pushed, the more people saw through their lies. Eventually, they faded back into the background, leaving me to focus on what truly mattered. By the end of the second year, Next Step Financial had expanded internationally. I partnered with organizations in the UK, Canada, and Australia, creating tailored resources for young adults in foster care systems around the world. The business wasn't just a career. It was my way of turning pain into purpose, of proving that no matter where you start, you have the power to shape your own future. By the time I turned 19, my life had changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. Next Step Financial had taken off, Ethan was thriving in his own right, and the Coopers had become more than just my foster family. They were my true family. Ethan's progress amazed me. After years of struggling under the weight of our parents' manipulations, he finally found his footing. He got a job at a tech startup, where he quickly rose through the ranks thanks to his natural problem-solving skills. He even started mentoring other young people who had faced difficult childhoods, offering them guidance and support just as I had done for him. Seeing him succeed filled me with pride, not just because of how far he'd come, but because it felt like we'd both managed to escape the shadows of our past. The Coopers were instrumental in all of this. They didn't just help me. They embraced Ethan as if he were their own. He spent many weekends at their house, where Greg would teach him home improvement skills while Susan baked enough cookies to feed an army. Their warmth and generosity never wavered, and the love they showed us helped heal wounds I hadn't realized were still open. One day, just after my 19th birthday, Susan and Greg sat me down in their living room. I noticed they were nervous, which was unusual for them. Susan kept glancing at Greg, who finally cleared his throat and said, "Lindsay, we've been thinking about something for a while now, and we wanted to talk to you about it." I tilted my head, curious. "What is it?" Susan reached over to take my hand. "We want to adopt you. Officially, if you like that." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at them. These two incredible people who had given me more love and support than I'd ever thought possible. "Are you serious?" I finally managed to ask. Greg nodded, his voice steady. "You've been our daughter in every way that matters. This just makes it official." I threw my arms around them, sobbing into Susan's shoulder. "I'd love that," I whispered. More than anything, the adoption process took a few months, but the day it became official was one of the happiest of my life. We celebrated with a small party at their house, complete with homemade lasagna and a cake that said "Welcome Home" in bright frosting. Ethan was there, too, grinning like a proud big brother. For the first time, I felt truly anchored, like I had a family that was mine forever. As my personal life flourished, so did my career. Next Step Financial continued to grow, reaching thousands of young people around the world. I started getting invitations to speak at conferences, where I shared my story and the lessons I'd learned along the way. Public speaking wasn't something that came naturally to me at first, but with Ellie's coaching and encouragement, I became more comfortable on stage. I quickly realized how powerful my voice could be, not just in sharing my experiences, but in inspiring others to believe in their own potential. One of the most surreal moments came when I was invited to give a TED Talk. I stood on that iconic stage, looking out at an audience of strangers who had come to hear my story. My hands shook as I gripped the microphone, but as I began to speak, the nerves faded. I talked about growing up in foster care, about the Coopers, about Ethan, and about how turning pain into purpose had changed my life. When I finished, the applause was so loud it felt like a wave washing over me. The talk went viral, garnering millions of views online. Suddenly, my inbox was flooded with messages from people all over the world. Young adults who felt seen for the first time, parents looking for ways to support their kids, and even foster parents who wanted to do better for the children in their care. The impact was overwhelming, but it reaffirmed that I was on the right path. That same year, I published a book about my journey. Writing it was cathartic, a chance to process everything I'd been through while offering practical advice for others. The book, titled Next Step, Finding Strength in Uncertain Times, became an international bestseller, earning over $1 million in its first year. The success was mind-boggling, but what mattered most to me were the stories from readers who said the book had changed their lives. Amidst all of this, my relationship with Ethan grew stronger than ever. He became one of my biggest cheerleaders, always encouraging me to dream bigger and aim higher. He even joined me at a few conferences, sharing his own story of resilience and growth. Seeing him step into his own power was one of the greatest rewards of my journey. Of course, my parents tried to interfere once again. The success of my book seemed to reignite their bitterness, and they started spreading lies about me on social media. They claimed I had exaggerated my story for sympathy and accused me of exploiting our family's struggles for profit. At first, their comments were easy to ignore, but then they started contacting journalists and tabloids, feeding them false stories about my childhood. One particularly nasty article accused me of fabricating the details of my foster care experience, citing anonymous sources who claimed I had always been a troublemaker. The smear campaign was exhausting, but I refused to let it derail me. I issued a public statement addressing the accusations and stood firm in my truth. My supporters rallied around me, flooding social media with messages of encouragement and sharing their own experiences with my work. Ethan, true to form, publicly called out our parents for their lies, posting a detailed rebuttal that went viral. "Lindsay is one of the strongest, most genuine people I know," he wrote. "Our parents abandoned us, and now they can't stand to see her succeed without them." Eventually, the noise died down. My parents' attempts to discredit me only made them look desperate, and their lies crumbled under scrutiny. The experience left me stronger, more determined than ever to continue my work. By the time I turned 21, Next Step Financial had become a global movement. I was traveling the world, speaking at events and working with organizations to improve support systems for young people in foster care. I even partnered with a major tech company to develop new features for the app, making it more accessible and user-friendly. Seeing the impact of my work was humbling and inspiring. a reminder of how far I'd come since those dark days of feeling abandoned and alone. Through it all, the Coopers remained my anchor. Susan and Greg were there for every milestone, from my first book signing to my TED Talk to the launch of my second app. They were my family in every sense of the word, and their love and support gave me the strength to keep pushing forward. Ethan, too, continued to thrive. He started his own nonprofit focused on mentorship for at-risk youth, and we often collaborated on projects. Our bond was unshakable, a testament to the resilience we'd both fought so hard to build. Together, we proved that our parents' selfishness didn't define us, that we could rise above it and create lives filled with purpose and connection.